Welcome to Chinwag Nation, episode number 14. I can't believe it's our 14th episode, Stephen. It's crazy.
Is
We
it
even with
14? Is it 14 and a half after the last episode?
That's true. So hopefully I'm not sounding like Max Headroom.
You're good.
It's probably dating myself a little bit. Back in the day there was a Coca-Cola brand, Max Headroom, and he used to glitch and twitch. And that's kind of how I felt like I looked and like kind of like how I felt like I sounded
Yeah.
last time we were meeting up. But if you're just joining us, this is our 14th episode, Chinwag Nation. We're talking about Lewin's change model. It's one of my favorite change models because it's plain talked. I
Yeah.
think there are quite a few out there that are pretty heavy, and they're heavy for good reason, right? Change is complex. It's about people. It's about the squishy stuff. It's about making the squishy unsquishy through these frameworks. So I get the why for these heavier frameworks, but Lewin's approachable, right? So if you're a leader, maybe you have never gone through ProSci, know nothing about ADCAR or Cotter or Bridges transition model, right? You just want to like wrap your head around how to approach change. This is the model for you. It's pretty straightforward. Again, it's plain talked, and it can really fit any situation, right, that you're in. Before we get going, I think it's important to kind of level set what we do and why we do it here. When Steven and I started this, we thought to ourselves, how can we give back? How can we serve? How can we support the community of leaders that we engage with, but also build that out? And so we started Third Place Leadership. It's not about making money. It's not about getting likes. It's not about, although if you do like and share, it does help us, build greater community. That's the motive here for us. Um, and our vision is to inspire lasting leadership communities. Our mission's to do the hard stuff together. Like nobody should have to go through a leadership role, whether it's like title based or you're just leading from your position or whatever it is. Nobody should have to go through that alone. There should be a community there. It shouldn't have to cost you anything, right? You shouldn't have to take a course and pay for that course to build community and a leadership community of support. And so that's what we're about. That's what we want to be about. That's why we're doing this. We're going to share lots of opinions. We will absolutely honor anonymity, for folks that we talk about. If we share stories, but for us, these opinions have nothing to do with past, current, or future roles. It's just about us having a good chinwag, good conversation about things. And so, um, Stephen, anything you want to share before we kind of get into this model and break it down?
No, I, I think one of the reasons why we started on this topic was we were thinking about, what are some tools that we could review with
Yeah, that's
folks,
right.
right?
Yeah.
And normally that's something that, we could just spend 10 minutes on a month. But what I really like about this model in particular, and you were kind of touching on it, Brian, was uh, it's a very low barrier to entry type of
Yeah,
change model.
absolutely.
As we talk about it, it's as simplistic as it sounds. And that's probably worth talking about in general as well, because even the simplest models can be difficult to implement sometimes. But looking forward to starting with this one. It's a great foundational change model, and yeah, we'll just kind of go from there.
Awesome. Well, so one of the first, or sorry, not one of the first, the first part of Lewin's change model is unfreeze. Unfreeze, right? And kind of I think the simplest way to look at that is like, what's the status quo? What is there? What's always been there? What are the things that people are going to want to hang on to with respect to this change? And with this one, time isn't your friend, right? I don't know about you, Stephen, but in my experience, it's been very easy to where I've seen it where it's been very easy for folks to wait things out. If they know a change is coming, right? It's very easy to kind of say like, "Oh, I've seen this happen before.
Hmm.
I'm just going to keep doing my job and it'll pass over, right? This won't stick." And I think if you look at a lot of the change statistics out there, whether it's a transformation or a change effort, you're going to find similar data, right? Without change management, without doing this people work, and really finding out what needs to be unfrozen, whether it's people or process or behaviors or systems. Um, you're going to probably end up at the end of the day having a failed effort. And it sounds kind of like doomsday, but I think that's the point of this unfreeze part of Lewin's model, right? You literally have to figure out what's frozen, status quo, right? And then put a plan together to unfreeze that.
Yeah, I like how you sort of tee it up, Lewin's model, because I've always thought of it a little bit differently in the sense like you're unfreezing the status quo, right? Like at a given point in
Yeah.
time. And I think just I, this is a little bit of spoiler alert here, but Lewin's model of unfreeze, change, refreeze, and then unfreeze, change, refreeze, right? It's a cycle. And
Yeah, absolutely.
that first time unfreezing, without having done any potential change in the past or trying to rewrite the change history that's been done, maybe your
Mhm.
organization has very low change readiness. That first unfreeze can be a big leap, right?
Sure.
And then I think the follow through on the actual change aspect of the model and then when to refreeze during the model is super important.
Yeah, there's a point in this model where they talk about like building the sense of urgency, and I think that's a through line probably through any change model, right? And that's why does this have to happen now? And for if you're in a leadership role or if you're even in a new leadership role, um, that's especially difficult in a new leadership role, right? If you're being asked to lead a change and you have no relationship history, right? You have no bearing yet on what people personally value. You could be unfreezing something that somebody really doesn't want to unfreeze, right? And if you're a brand new manager, a brand new leader, it's that's a really tricky thing, and that's what I meant by time's not on your friend, or time is not on your side when it comes to any unfreezing effort, right? It's you really have to consider what is the most important and the most critical to unfreeze, knowing that you might be able to get to some things later, down the line.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be curious, Brian. I know I didn't tee you up for this at all, but
That's all good.
can you share an example of when you unfroze something and it went really well, and then when you unfroze something and it didn't go so well? I mean, what was the big difference there?
Unfroze something that went well and unfroze something that didn't go well. Um, I would probably both that come to mind are when I was leading a field office during the COVID response.
Mm, hmm.
Um, and unfreezing that didn't go well was was basically going from virtual, right, to physical service delivery overnight.
Yeah,
You had folks who, at the time it was Skype, right? You had folks who had used Skype pretty regularly, and you had folks who hadn't used Skype at all, right?
yeah,
And now they're being asked to provide service delivery over a virtual platform, uh, and so like in that instance, asking people to do it, it was kind of clunky at first, but we put things in place where we actually paired people who used it often with people who didn't, and we created space for experimentation, right? So they practiced with each other, and I think that was a key part of kind of bridging, right, and helping people unfreeze their patterns. um, another example in that space was how we delivered service, right? And anticipating a huge increase, right, in demand. We had to figure out how we did that without the staffing, right, to do that. And so we unfroze our thinking as it relates to how we do services, and we looked at actually cross office support. So we pooled our resources together to meet the demand of a service, right, in that space. And so that was both. I think were the first one was a little bit harder, and the reason why I would park it in the unsuccessful space is because um, it was technology based, right? And people who are actually intentionally avoiding the technology. In the second space, it was more so how do we collaborate, but we know what we need to do, right? We know how we need to deliver the service, and so I think um, it kind of, I think this is another through line through change management, and that's where's the resistance and what's the level of resistance to the unfreezing, and I think that's what makes it the first one a little bit more challenging than the second
Yeah,
one.
yeah,
Yeah,
it makes sense.
yeah,
Thank you.
and
I
so
just wanted to do
yeah,
something that was like a more like applicable example, right? Because
yeah.
we talk philosophically quite a bit
Well,
on.
I mean, on a personal level, right? Getting my teenagers to do their chores, like I love them, and they work hard, and they're great. Sometimes you have to reward them, right, with an allowance, and so that's kind of in the down again. Spoiler, that's more down in the refreeze section, but in terms of how you sustain, but recognizing rewarding is also another way to unfreeze, right? Look at people's strengths, what they're really good at, and celebrate that, like, and express the value of those strengths and skills in the future state, and helping the future state be successful. And so I
Yeah,
think seeing the people for who they are, validating them, and trying your best to meet them where they're at is a really successful way to help people unfreeze.
yeah,
Yeah. What
makes
about you,
sense.
man? What's a time that it's been successful for you and a time that it hasn't been? What did you do? What did you learn?
I mean, there's always so many variables when it comes to change, but I don't mean to sort of deflect this
Okay.
this question because I'm thinking of a similar type of question and thinking about the applicability of Lewin's model today, where I don't know about you, man, but it feels like there's a push to be unfrozen all the time.
Mm.
Uh, and you hear about this term change readiness, right?
Hmm. Yeah, it's very common.
And they
Right.
talk about it seems like every organization that I've talked with, it's like the more change ready you can be, the better off you'll be because change is going to be a constant.
Hmm.
With Lewin's model, there's very deliberate unfreezing and freezing to allow time to sort of sustain and allow the change to stick and allow the team to rebound without having too much change fatigue right before you
Hmm.
freeze again. And so that's
Yeah.
just at the forefront of my mind, thinking about Lewin's model as I would apply it today versus Lewin's model as I would have applied it a decade ago, right?
No,
Because
I
I
mean,
feel like that pace was a lot more applicable 10 years ago.
yeah, I mean, there's absolutely, the pace is absolutely relentless at this point,
Yeah,
right? And I think there's a lot of truth to that. It's there, you'll hear people, right, talking about burnout, right, or stress or fatigue, and I think there's a core in that, in how much change people are being asked to manage, not just professionally but also personally. And then you couple that with a learning curve of being a brand new manager or supervisor, right? That's
yeah,
uh you almost have to be a superhero uh in a
for sure.
leadership role. And this is not to oversell or over dramatize that, but it's a lot to consider, right? As it relates to change, and as it relates to change in the workplace. But I actually, and when you talked about that, I tied a thread to when we first came on, and you talked about this repeatable cycle,
Yeah,
right? And I think if you consider the idea of a repeatable cycle, almost like an agile, right, approach
right.
to Lewin's model, and then you couple that with like what's the most critical to unfreeze, you can bring that scope down a little bit. You can bring that intensity down a little bit, and just say like, hey, we have to go through this change, and we just went through another change. Understand that it's a lot of change on top of a lot of change, but what are the most critical things that we need to focus on? And no matter how much change you're going through, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what change model you apply. It doesn't matter how often you're going through change. It doesn't matter how many changes are layered upon change. People care about two things usually, every time. Is my work going to change? And is
Yeah,
who I'm going to have to work with going to change? Right? That's typically what people care about. Outside of back in the day, people used to really care about who they were going to sit next to.
Yep. Yep.
In a virtual world, it doesn't really matter anymore. I guess with some of the in office, if you're in office on a regular basis, that might matter. But in a remote space, you're next to everybody, right, on a virtual screen. But I think if you can make those things clear, right, is my work going to change, and that, am I hearing that from the right person? And then the second thing is who I'm going to work with going to change,
Yep.
right? Because we get used to our communication styles, we get used to our rhythm of business, and that's the I think the thing to unfreeze is like, here's our rhythm of business, here's how we usually go about things, here's what we're going to have to think about shifting, and these are the most critical.
Yep.
um, then a layer down is really about like, does somebody really truly connect to the work that's changing, and how can you help them and support them through that journey? And that's super important. I think another through line for all change models is the why, right? Why are we doing this? Why is it so important to do it now? And that's a really, I think that's a really good way to help people settle into constant change too. And it's something that can't ever be missed, regardless of talking about Lewin or pro side. Doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
You have to explain why you're doing it. Um, so I know that was a pretty good dive into unfreezing. Then you kind of have to change, right? And I think there's probably some connection between the unfreeze and change with Lewin. And I touched on the right level of support, right? Because you're talking at this point, you're talking about behaviors, you're talking about processes, you're talking about mindsets when it comes to the actual change process. And I think the most important thing is support. And if you think about, Stephen, for you, the most critical change that you've ever led as a leader, what were the key things from a support standpoint that you made sure were in place?
Uh, I mean, you were mentioning ProSci before, and I
Yeah.
think thinking of the ADCAR model is really important because it's five basic variables, but those first three are very empathetic, right? Like developing awareness, creating desire, ensuring that the knowledge exists for the
Mm.
change. And I find that change is most uh, impactful in a positive way if you can handle it very empathetically in the way that you communicate out what change is going to be happening and why. And then if you can also uh, solicit, right, the voice of the customer, or I should say, like those who are going to be impacted. Because if you're able to snag all the concerns and answer all the questions, and then be able to reiterate the answers to those questions and be able to reiterate folks' concerns in a way that says they've been heard, which by the way doesn't necessarily mean that you can address their concern, right, within a particular change. But for people to know that they've been heard and that their concern is addressed, why or why not, I have found that that eases that uncertainty, right? Because we know that the change is going to happen. But if we can make somebody more change ready, or a little bit less resistant or more comfortable going through that change process, even better if they can be a part of the solution or the change itself, right? I think that helps exponentially. Versus sometimes you have to change right away, and you don't necessarily have the luxury of being able to consult and go through um, even a long unfreeze or change period, which could be beneficial. Um, Sometimes you just have to go change and freeze, and that's tough too.
Yeah, I thought my mind's right cataloging through all the different change efforts I've led, both as a leader but also as a consultant. And whether it's a consultant within an organization or a consultant outside of an organization, or just like straight up leading change efforts. Um, just a little quick side note. When I started my career in the grocery industry a long time ago, the organization that I started with, we were still price tagging. items. And through that, so that just kind of tells you, that was early 2000s. And we as leaders in the space led several modernizations of how we do business. And one of the things, and you touched on this a little bit, one of the things, regardless of any change efforts, um, that I have done over and over and over again, and this is a great thing for any new leader, any existing leader, seasoned or not, to take into consideration, and that's to create and design spaces for listening. Um, and one of my favorite bolt-on change models, and you can use this with any change. You can couple it with any change model, and that's Bridges' transition model. And what
Sure.
Bridges basically boils down to is create spaces for listening designed for the people that need to be listened to, and do it until they're done, until they're done, right? They're going to either verbally, non-verbally, or in some way, shape, or form tell you, okay, they're ready to transition into, right, the future state. Um, and I've had people say, like, do we really need to do another listening session? And I'm like, yeah, I think that there's more. There's more to say. There's more
Yeah.
to say, right? And that's one-to-ones, that's team meetings, that's um, small groups. But I think you identify with those areas, right, where there's intensity, and you can truly dial down the intensity by creating spaces for listening. And I think that's applicable in your home. I think that's applicable in your workplace. I think that's applicable for anybody that you're trying to work with and build a relationship with, right? Is to create spaces for listening. And does that mean that you're going to do it perfect every time? No. But if you're listening, you can make adjustments for the next time that you create a listening session, right?
Yeah.
And you kind of called that out as um, you can make little changes, right? That means something to people, and I think that's really important. So if there's anything you take away to help people move between these different stages of Lewin's model, from unfreezing to changing to refreezing, create spaces to listen over and over and over again. And one of my favorite mentors, I think I mentioned Billy last time. I'll mention Billy again because I just talked to her today. She used to say, if you ask for feedback, you better plan on doing something with it, right? And
Yeah.
so whether that's telling people, like, hey, we appreciate this feedback, but we couldn't do something with it this time, or here's what we took action on because we could. And so I think that's a really important piece, right? The more you listen, and the more you design those listening spaces for the people that you're trying to listen to, the better the change is going to be.
Yeah.
I think it's highly critical.
Yeah. I think of, I guess, multi layers of Lewin's model. And
Sure.
there's, I find that, like, unfreeze for me, the way I think of it is you hit the start button on the stopwatch and the change immediately starts, right? Like,
Sure.
you're being intentional about your action, and then it
Mhm.
stops when you're ready to freeze and the
Yeah.
changes. And I
I
think
wish it
about
was that. I wish it was that simple.
I know, right? Uh,
That'd be
but
nice.
I know, like, being a new leader within an organization,
Sure.
there's an unfreezing that happens the second that, I think, the first announcement that there's been a new leader, right, coming on board, that, or when a previous leader vacates a position, right? There's all this uncertainty that's happening.
Sure. Yeah.
And there's this unfreeze period that just sort of ticks along in the background as it relates to organizational change management as a whole. And I say that because I think the ideal state of being a leader, and this is a very difficult ideal state, if not impossible to get to, is that you've earned enough trust of your people through reoccurring changes that if a change has to happen without explanation, that they trust you enough to know that you had their
Yeah.
best interests at heart, right?
Yeah.
Um, Even though traditionally you're going to want to, like you mentioned with the Bridges model, set aside as much time for active and empathetic listening as possible
Yeah.
and sort of guide people through the change. But we don't always have that luxury. And for me, I think that ideal refreeze point of being a leader may be when you've earned enough trust for your team that you can change without them, and they know that you had their best interests at heart. Or if it negatively impacts the team, that they knew that behind the scenes you did everything you could. I don't know if I feel like I've gotten close to that sometimes in
Mhm.
certain organizations, but change is always hard. It's a very uneasy feeling for human beings. It creates a lot of discomfort.
Anybody who says they love change, you might, you give, like when your dog gives you the head tilt, you're like, oh, tell me more.
Yeah,
I'm curious. And it's not that people can't handle it, right? Or there are levels of people who do love change, but I think to your point, every change is going to create a pause,
yeah,
right? It's going to create just a brief pause, a brief breath to be like, okay, what's going on here, right? Before they move forward. And I love that call out. Like there are the change instances, right? There are the change events, and there's this undercurrent of like daily investment in the ability to manage whatever change is going to come your way,
yeah,
right? Whether it's refining your communication systems of communication or refining your systems of recognition, which leads into refreeze, leads into this refreeze space. Like, how do you sustain this work? And I think what I'm hearing you say is the best way to sustain it is to continually invest in it on a daily basis.
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I guess it comes back to that change readiness, right? Um,
Yep.
but a big part of that change readiness is trust.
Hmm.
Um, I've had hundreds of moments where even though I may have a really close relationship with somebody of authority over me, right, they have to withhold certain information, um, or kind of delay at what point they can communicate with me about something that's going to happen. And there's usually reasons behind that. And that can be really uncomfortable if you don't have trust with
Yeah,
your
sure.
leadership. But there are times where, despite my eagerness and curiosity, right, like I can respect giving that leader the space to have to be confidential because I trust them and I know that they're probably doing everything that they can, and I don't want to put them in a bad spot, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Change is definitely a team effort.
Yeah,
So we covered unfreeze and some key aspects of that. We've covered change, right? And we talked about what it would take to lead through that, not just the event itself, but change readiness and daily investment through trust building, relationship building, communication, which I think leads really well into kind of this idea of refreeze, right? So lock in the new way of doing work. And I couldn't help, because I'm looking at my notes here, and right, it talks about systems and habits, recognition, celebration, right? Those key things that you want to consider in any sustainability plan, right? It's like, how are we going to continue to reward these new behaviors through recognition or celebration? What are the systems, right, that we have to pay attention to see if we're falling back, right, into the new and processes to see if we're falling back into the new way of doing things? And I can't help but think about, um, you said hundreds, so I feel like I need to say hundreds. Like hundreds, my hundreds of continuous improvement and change of mini change events, and we talked about this in past lives and podcasts around Tuckman's model and like the forming, storming, norming, performing
yeah,
cycle. And I can't help but wonder, right, if when you talk about refreezing, you need to talk about like what are the new roles and responsibilities that we have to keep in mind. And I think you talked about performance measurement, but measure against, right? And so what are our systems of measurement that show that we're reinforcing these new roles and responsibilities? And I think that's a key part of refreezing. I think about goals and objectives. So I think this is the tricky part. right? Because traditionally, organizations has had strategic plans,
Yeah.
right? And those strategic plans drove objectives, or I'm sorry, goals, and those goals drove objectives. Those objectives drove actions. But if you're in constant change, right, almost exhaustive, right, effort to make sure you're lining up to the strategy, right,
Yeah.
and or adjusting your strategy to meet that, if that's the model that you choose. But I think with constant change comes constant adjustments to goals and objectives, which changes roles and responsibilities and actions. And so I think no matter what change you're going through, I think Lewin's model clearly states like you have to figure out the new way of doing work and make sure that it gets locked in, right? Through, again, celebration, recognition, but also, right, this idea of like clear roles and responsibilities, and clear understanding of how you're going to measure, right, the work and get it done.
And it's interesting because this is where there's two different practices that do have a fairly strong overlap, and they work better together when they overlap, and that's
Sure.
organization change management and continuous improvement, right?
Yeah.
And so when you decide to freeze,
Mhm.
right, like it's so important to, one, take the time to retrospective, how did that change go? Like, hey, were we at a point where we can actually talk
Oh.
about how this change went, right? And
Mhm.
that way you're proactively bettering the way that you do change as an organization in the future because you know more change is going to come.
Mhm.
And then, and to your point, right, like starting to measure. So like, okay, now that you've created a baseline or a jumping off point for what your change should be and the impact that you're anticipating to have, like, is that actually working? Because if it's
Sure.
not, you might have to unfreeze again, and you need to go about doing different changes. And there's of course a ton of continuous improvement philosophies and approaches out there to be able to address that. But um, you just have to be really intentional when you freeze because you're creating
Sure.
a new baseline. To your point about Tuckman's model, right? Like you're going through the process again of storming, norming, forming,
Every
performing
time.
every single time.
Every time. Yeah, every time. My one of my former coworkers used to say lean is change management, and change management is lean. Right? Because you're right, there's a lot of overlap. One of the core tenets of continuous improvement and lean is people, right?
Yeah.
And the heart for people. Um, and so I think there's absolutely some very intentional overlap between the two, ideas and concepts, and it's really important to consider, right, the things that we've talked about, and that's clear roles and responsibilities, making sure that you're looking back to see like what went well, what didn't go well, what adjustments do we want to make the next time we go through a change, because frankly we're probably going to go through another change here, pretty soon. And making sure that you're recognizing and celebrating people right through that, and the value of celebration and recognition is probably one of the most underestimated. And I find myself falling into this trap, right? When you get really busy and you get all about the work, those are the first things that you just forget. You almost have to kind of make a daily discipline and a daily habit. So I know, we talked about unfreeze, we talked about change, we talked about refreeze, we talked about Lewin's model at a high level. It's probably one of the most approachable change models out there, and it's because it's plain talked. It can fit really any situation that you're in. It's scalable, right, to the smallest change through to the biggest change, and it's really easy to plug in other change models into it as kind of like an add-on, and take and weave kind of concepts together. Um, we can cover a tool in 10 minutes, but I think this is an important subject, and Lewin's model is a great way to talk about change. Um, as we wrap up this time, I just want to remind people like what we're about. We're about inspiring lasting leadership communities. We believe it's important to do the hard stuff together, talk through the hard things. So if at any point after these conversations or during you have a question, like you're working through something that's connected to or not connected to what we're talking about, we'd love to lean in and learn more about that. This isn't about money for us. It's about serving our community and giving back. That's Stephen and I. That's probably one of our most core aligned values outside of humor, is being in service and loving on people that we know and that we're connected with. And this is one of the ways we want to give back. And hopefully that you've gained something by spending some time with us. Um, so if you have any questions, it's kind of our last 10 minutes. We typically reserve this for any questions folks might have. If you're just joining us, super excited. If you're gonna watch this after, because Stephen, we're now competing with Sunday Night Football, and this is
That's
not a
true.
plug. This is not a plug for Sunday Night Football. But we're competing with the millions of football fans out there, um,
I
and we'll
mean,
probably get more views if the game's a blowout, right? So like,
I was
but we
about to
may.
say let's define competing and see if we can really use that as a term of what we're doing with
Yeah,
these
right.
people.
But I've heard from several people who actually watch these after the fact, and
Yeah,
so if you're watching them after the fact and you have questions for us, please reach out to us. We just want to be of service and be of community. We absolutely are not making money off this. It's not the intent. We just want to be of service um and support you. So
heck,
um
even the
even the
merch
merch, yeah,
profits go directly back to
goes
the
back to the
community
community.
for
Yeah,
purposes of job training and career training. So our goal is to make nothing,
make
but
nothing. Yeah,
to inspire
yeah.
people and create a community. So
Yeah, absolutely. So if you have any questions, if you've been with us for a bit, if you have any questions, please pop them in chat. If you have any questions about something we haven't talked about, we would love to dig into those over our last 10 minutes or so, and spend time with you.
a good
Steve and
deal.
I, while we're waiting for folks, you know, if you could, if you could share one takeaway for this week that people could work on as it relates to Lewin's model, what would you throw out there?
I I would say that in all the hustle and bustle and the craziness of the grind, to be intentional about when you're going to decide to freeze, even if that freeze is for a couple of minutes or an hour, and think about how can you maximize that time to better yourself for the next unfreeze period.
Hmm.
Um, because if you're not taking the time to define roles and responsibilities as it goes through a change, if you're not taking the time and awareness and desire wasn't created as you went and implemented the change, you're creating a gap. And each change that happens, that gap is going to get wider and wider. It's going to create more and more confusion, ultimately frustration and resentment.
Yeah.
And so every second that you can invest in getting to a part where you're norming again and people understand what's happening, why it happened, and where we're going next, can greatly benefit your culture as it relates to organizational change management.
I'm gonna echo yours, but I'm gonna take it a slightly different
Sure.
direction. So yeah, I believe it. I believe in the pause. I believe in I call it an organizational breath, right? Taking an organizational breath and just breathing for a second in between those changes. I'm gonna emphasize the breath within the change. And taking an organizational breath within the change and to take and kind of emphasize what I shared earlier, and that's to take just a brief second, just a brief breath, right, to understand who it is you're asking to change, and then just again, and maybe another breath to understand who they are, what they care about, what's important to them, and then designing a space to listen, right? And what I mean by that is if you normally meet with them, in a virtual meeting, but that folks truly value hearing about and talking through a change in person, right? Take that into consideration.
Yeah.
Um, if right, that people love, I'm I'm kind of making a joke here, but if people love a pizza party, the joke is the employee engagement meme,
Yeah.
right? The pizza
Here's your
party.
culture. Yeah.
Is that yeah, right? But if people do love like conversing about change around food, right? Get together and break bread and talk about it, right? Make it more human, right? Than kind of uh, a business value add kind of a circumstance, you
Yeah.
know. And so I think thinking about the people, taking an organizational breath, think about the people, think about what they really care about, who they are as humans, and then design for listening sessions that meet that. I think you will exponentially increase your ability, coupled with right your recommendation of what did we learn and how do we keep that gap right of learning between changes small. You will exponentially improve your ability to work through and manage change, and it'll feel better right for you, and it'll feel better for the people involved. And so really appreciate you joining us, Stephen. Really always appreciate the conversations with you.
And
We
you
are
too.
we are competing with uh, Sunday Night Football. I don't know who's playing. Do you know who's playing tonight?
I don't,
Yeah, well,
but
I know the
there's
Seahawks won.
it makes for a good day.
Makes for a good week.
I want to throw it out there because the change I think can apply at a very personal level as well.
Sure.
And for those who are taking time out of their hustle and bustle to actually watch Sunday Night Football, I'm really proud of you. But we talk about
Too.
doing the hard stuff together, right? And I think it's really important to because I've coached many of people and I've mentored many of people. But even something like getting a new job or getting a promotion or some type of positive change, maybe you just got married or maybe you're in a new relationship,
Hmm.
even positive change is stressful and it takes a toll on your capacity. And so be
Yeah.
thinking of the good and the bad that's going on in your life and take an intentional pause and
Hmm.
freeze and
Yeah.
reflect on that and give yourself some grace as you go about the week.
Love it. What a great way to close. Again, we talked about Lewin's model, unfreeze, change, refreeze. Uh, Check it out. We'll put a link in the chat after our live today for you to kind of dig deeper if you'd like. And wishing you a great week ahead.